we going live yet? Yep, beautiful. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in the Legislative Council. This is our second debate of the day. I'm really excited to brief everybody that this bill was created by the Mildura Rural City team, Rural City Council team, and they will introduce and sponsor this bill. My name's Heath. I am the Teams of Parliamentary Training Director for Youth Parliament 2021, and really excited to have you on board with us watching. We have our chair, our president for the day, for the debate in Ali Kappa, MP, who will introduce herself in a second once I hand over, but we will commence debate shortly. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I'm Ali Kappa. I'm the member for Mildura in the Legislative Assembly. This is my first term in Parliament, and I'm very happy to be here today to be a part of Youth Parliament, which I haven't done before. So I guess what I'd say now is that I call on the sponsor of the bill. Maybe not.
President, Honourable Member Ablett speaking. I rise to propose the bill of Criminalising Coercive Control 2021. Before we start, I'd just like to give a trigger warning for the whole debate to anyone who is sensitive to the issues of domestic violence, so they have the opportunity to leave the chamber now. And I remind you that the Wellbeing channel is open if needed. Family violence is a devastating issue, and we in Victoria have the highest rates of victims than any other state. This hits close to home for my honourable members and I who live in Mildura, which is one of the highest rates of domestic violence in Victoria. Some of us know all too well the mental trauma that can arise from abuse personally or maybe from a friend. Criminalising coercive control has already occurred in Tasmania and introduced in other states and countries, so we're already behind the rest of the nation and the globe. This is a crisis, and we need to be doing more to fix this. Not only should we be addressing the already existing cases, but also be taking action to prevent it before it becomes extreme. The Coercive Control Bill 2021 will help victims, especially women and children, to escape the abusive relationships that affect them emotionally, psychologically, and financially. And by addressing it, it prevents emotional trauma and also prevents potentially fatal injuries before it progresses to physical violence. Appallingly, this is not already illegal. It's not illegal for a loved one to stop you seeing friends and family. It's not illegal for them to control how you spend your money to the point where you lose thousands of dollars or all confidence to live independently. It's not illegal for them to make you cry yourself to sleep because they don't allow you to eat because you've gained too much weight. And it's not illegal for a perpetrator to make their victim live in fear from making a mistake, wondering when they're going to snap. These malicious abusers go beyond physical violence to ruin lives. And we need to acknowledge that internal trauma can be just as damaging. And by acknowledging this, we can also prevent these avoidable deaths and injuries caused by domestic violence. The Coercive Control Bill outlines a jail time of up to 8 years or rehabilitation time for up to 2 years as sanctions for those charged guilty, which was carefully decided by our members based on other forms of domestic violence sanctions. While developing this bill, we spoke to a representative from the Orange Door, a support system for the domestic violence crisis, who made clear to us the significant positive outcomes passing of this bill would have in his workplace, and that they are desperate to reach wider ranges of vulnerable people in our community. Also, Minister of Prevention of Family Violence, Gabrielle Williams, has openly expressed her support of this bill. These victims are being deprived of their freedom and autonomy in their lives, and through humiliation, intimidation, and manipulation from people that should be actually loving and supporting them. And yet we, as Victorian Parliament, are not even showing to our communities that we denounce this horrific violence because we haven't even criminalised it. Our services are ready for this bill. Our affected Victorians are ready for this bill. And so why, as their representatives and leaders, are we not making the difference they want and need to protect our communities? Physical violence does not emerge out of nowhere. It goes hand in hand with destroying victims' self-esteem and independence, So this bill can save lives. And I urge anyone that knows of or is experiencing domestic violence to reach out to the 1-800-RESPECT hotline to have a chat or to try and get out of a difficult situation. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is that the bill now be read a first time. All those that of that opinion say aye, to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I call on the sponsor of the bill.
Hi, it's Tom speaking here. I think we might have got a little bit mixed up and we're slightly out of order. I think the honourable member just gave their sponsor speech, so we'll move on to the main refuter.
President, the Honourable Member Cameron speaking. We, the government, instead take the position that whilst coercive control is an idealistic approach to solving the issue of domestic violence, it fails to target the root of the issue, and instead of protecting individuals in abusive relationship, it remains optimistic in targeting relationships that may someday become abusive. Gaslighting and coercive control behaviours are incredibly destructive to those that endure relationships, but they are constantly faced with such behaviours. The very way that these behaviours are able to occur under the radar, where families fail to recognise the situations that their loved ones are in, is because the behaviours are so difficult to identify. These behaviours are adapted by the perpetrators in order to achieve maximum psychological damage on their victims. It is for this very reason that these behaviours cannot be drilled down to a checklist or some dot points. We, the government, will continue to further explain the impacts of approving the proposed coercive control bill on Indigenous communities, how it may lead to adverse outcomes and their impacts on those that are wrongfully accused, its failure to address the complex nature of relationships, in addition to the bill failing to address all domestic violence issues. Instead, the government believes that we should instead focus on preventing domestic violence and coercive control and protecting the victims of abusive relationships instead of incrimination. Evan Stark concluded on the basis of his research, showing that interventions have failed to improve women's long-term safety in relationships or to hold perpetrators accountable. The primary reason that coercive control is yet to be illegalised in Australia is that we as parliamentarians have to address what lies beneath the prevalence of domestic violence, the intergenerational trauma, by creating therapeutic approaches. Therefore, we instead believe that this approach to criminalising a social problem is the problem. Instead, we suggest a much more well-rounded approach, including legislation that addresses the need for major structural reform, as criminalising coercive control addresses just one small part of what countless advocacy organisations are working towards. Domestic violence is a gendered problem, affecting women regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, or class. However, the proposed criminalisation of coercive control can lead to a number of unintended consequences for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, Indigenous people, refugees, and migrants. People from these groups are far more likely to be arrested and imprisoned, and it comes to as no surprise that a number of female victims are charged as perpetrators due to the failure of the legal system to address the blatant sexism integrated through common law precedents. The opposition have attempted to define the behaviours that contribute to coercive control. However, the very need to outline the extensive number of behaviours that can be likened to psychological and emotional conditioning only further highlights the need for a clear checklist. It is the belief of the government that approving a bill such as this one will only further lead to countless future amendments as new gaslighting and destructive behaviours become increasingly prevalent, as Parliament attempts to include all of these behaviours in clauses 4, 5, 6, and 7. Approximately 1 in 4 women experience violence by an intimate partner, compared to 1 in 13 men. It is estimated that 60% of domestic violence victims do not report to the police, and it is instead believed that the real number is exponentially higher. This bill fails to address the root cause of domestic violence and providing the relevant support needed in order to encourage victims to come forward and share their stories, as well as reporting to police. Criminalising coercive control can be likened to placing a band-aid over a gunshot wound. It looks nice and it appears to be a clean fix, but ultimately remains a short-term fix to a much larger problem. we, the government, propose a bill that better addresses the issues associated with domestic violence and the psychological effects of suffering such abusive behaviour. Instead, a bill offering mental health care, support systems for battered individuals, as well as encouraging victims to come forward, reporting issues to the police, and feeling comfortable in reaching out to their loved ones and family members.
Okay, thank you. I understand the floor is now open to debate. No? I'm reading from a script. That's what's next. What's happening next?
Sorry, Tom speaking here. You're doing
Hi,
really
Tom.
great. You're doing really great, Ali. So we're just going to go through our 6 speakers on each side.
I'm reading from a script. The script doesn't seem to be very helpful. Okay,
that's all right.
You take it away, Tom.
No, I will have you call upon the honourable member with their hand up for me, please.
Okay, so I'll call on the honourable member Paul. Is that right?
Yes, President.
You got it? Good, thanks. Hey.
I am a survivor of domestic violence and not a victim. Imagine that our friend gets into a new relationship. At first, everything is perfect. He offers to support her financially so she doesn't have to work long hours anymore. The longer they date, the less we hear from her. He becomes jealous of her friendships, so she stops seeing us. They move to another city away from her friends and family. We text her, but she does not reply. He supports her, he never hits her, and the arguments are always her fault. When she went to the police station to get an AVO, they informed her that there was nothing that they could do because she had never been physically injured. He tracked her phone the next day and killed her. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, a woman is killed by a current or former partner every 9 days in Australia. Legitimising concerns around the behaviour of controlling partners will prevent the escalation of abuse and deaths that never should occur in the first place. Why would one have to wait up to 14 months to get an IVO when what they are going through is deemed to be abuse, but not seen the same as physical abuse? It just doesn't make sense to me. I would like to leave you with this. A bruise may last a week, a cut a month, but the damage from domestic abuse, that lasts a lifetime. We are enabling this abuse. This is not my Victoria. My Victoria gives people a voice. My Victoria makes people feel safe and protected. My Victoria has the back of victims of domestic violence, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial abuse. So I ask, what is your Victoria?
All right. Tom, do you want to tell me what I do next?
Hom speaking here. We have the honourable member from the government with their hand up. If you could call upon them to present their speech.
Would that be sorry, so this list I ignore, do I? The list I've been given I ignore? And I just go on who's got the hand up here. Is that right?
Yes, Ali, it's Heap speaking. I think that this has changed since last night.
Right. So I'll just put aside my notes here and I'll just take Hom's
so
guidance.
whoever's come up.
Whoever happens to be on here. Okay.
Yep.
So that would be the honourable member Espinosa.
Yep. President,
is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
President, the honourable member Pulford Espinosa. Aboriginal women make up 2% of Australia's population, but represent 34% of women behind bars. Service providers have estimated that Indigenous women are labelled as perpetrators in 90% of domestic abuse cases. And out of the 27 women murdered in 2017 by an intimate partner, 12 had been previously identified by police as the perpetrator. Criminalising coercive control will have negative impacts in the Indigenous community due to stereotypes and misinformation. Previous cases have shown that police are quick to judge in such scenarios when the First Nations people are involved, making wrong and harmful judgments. Police often side with the abuser and invalidate the victim's trauma. A simple statement of, "I was managing her finances because she's not very good with money," is enough to fool the police into believing the abuser and criminalising the victim. Aboriginal women are largely discriminated against in front of our legal system and are subjected to many different preconceived notions, making it hard for them to approach the police in hopes of justice. This proposed bill will create a lack of trust between the Aboriginal community and the police. How will it achieve its goal if people aren't even coming to the police for help? For example, Aboriginal women are 5 times more likely to experience abuse than other Australian women, and they are far less likely to report such abuse to the police and experience harsher barriers when doing so. So how can we go around legalizing a bill that does not provide safety for all Victorians, no matter their differences? This state's way of approaching domestic abuse does not need a band-aid, it needs a reform.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm now calling on the Honourable Member Piper.
President, the Honourable Member Piper speaking. Though coercive control is acknowledged as a form of domestic abuse, in comparison to physical violence against the victim, psychological and emotional abuse is disregarded by our state's court of law as a viable crime, and therefore not prosecuted. We as a state preach the importance of mental health and well-being, yet in times where victims of psychological exploitation are most in need, they are denied protection that would otherwise be received in the case of physical violence. Emotional abuse is often described as invisible abuse. It goes unseen, but to survivors, it is not an exaggeration. It is not a small argument. It manipulates a victim into a sense of self-doubt. It deteriorates their control over their individual lives gradually until their very being no longer falls under their own management, but in the hands of the abuser, the exploiter. After Scotland's approval towards the legislation to criminalise coercive control in 2020, Chief Executive of Scottish Women's Aid, Dr. Marsha Scott, stated, "Women have been telling us for 40 years that it is psychological and emotional abuse that is most traumatic for them and the hardest to recover from." With this statement in mind, why do we continue to perceive the damages of psychological harm as less detrimental to those of physical harm? Psychological harm can be proven in the court of law, as in the instance of an IVO being breached. If one's psychological well-being is being affected, a criminal charge can be laid. These procedures are not unfamiliar. They are the responsibility of the Police Domestic Violence Unit that is already developed across each major police station across Victoria. These systems are already in place. All we need to do is implement this bill. We have the ability to change lives here today, vulnerable lives. Victorians need our help. This is a matter of public importance.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go on the sheet for a sec and see if this is better, because I can't see a hand up anywhere here. So let's see if I can get this. So I now call upon the Honourable Member Griffiths.
President, the Honourable Member Griffiths. The effects of introducing laws against coercive control could, sadly, cause more harm than good. We've yet to truly pull enough data from countries such as Scotland and the UK on the long-term effects these laws have had on victims of domestic violence. Criminalising coercive control could potentially make these victim situations worse. Systems abuse is a term used to describe how perpetrators of domestic violence abuse the system to their advantage to gain an edge over their victims. Allow me to paint a picture. Currently, if someone is suffering under coercive control, if they reach out for help, they have only the support of family or friends if they're lucky, potentially some support groups that are dedicated to fighting abuse. But with laws against coercive control, victims' attempts to reach out could lead down the path of a trial, further complicating and potentially harming the victim through attacks on their character, mistreatment by police, and the mental stress that comes with appearing in court, especially against an abuser. This is called an adversarial court proceeding, the very system used against those who it is intended to protect. The opposition have their heart in the right place, but these new laws need time, and we need a better system to accommodate them.
Okay, thank you. I now call upon the Honourable Member Beard.
Thank you, President. The Honourable Member Beard. I rise in the House today to speak on the Coercive Control Victoria Bill 2021. This is a bill that means something to each and every one of us sitting here today to varying degrees. Coercive control can affect many people and in many different forms, and I'd like to take a moment to speak about financial control and the impact that this might have on a person. Perpetrators of coercive control may use finances to abuse, intimidate, harass, and threaten the affected person in an effort to maintain control over them. This may include things like depriving the affected person of financial support, restricting them from their own financial account or accounts, and taking wage benefits or allowances. Abusers use deception and coercion to subvert any independence, confidence, or self-esteem of their victims, fostering control through dependency. Of all of these aspects, one thing remains clear. Abusing and manipulating a person's finances is only another form of control that is often dismissed, and too often these victims are women. An ABC article written in 2019 by Whitney Barlett and Rachel Busbridge reported that approximately 16% of women and 8% of men experience coercive control at some point in their lifetime. Though financial abuse is loosely defined in the Family Law Act, it commonly occurs in the context of other forms of coercive control, whether this be emotional, psychological, verbal, or other. As a result, convictions can be hard to come by, and this is due to a lack of education around forms of abuse that differ from physical harm. And in the eyes of the opposition, it is vital that legislation like our Coercive Control Bill be implemented to give people affected by such forms of abuse an avenue to escape toxic relationships in whatever form they may be. Research has found that 80% of women seeking help for domestic violence disputes have experienced some form of coercive control as part of that abuse. We as the opposition feel that legalising such behaviour will be an excellent and effective preventative measure that will aid in stopping a problem before it spirals out of control. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call, I think, on the Honourable Member Noel.
President, Honourable Member Noel speaking. The opposition's bill attempts to solve a very persistent issue in Australian culture and is undeniably well-intentioned. However, blind spots in the legislation may put Aussies who are doing the right thing at risk. This may be an unlikely situation, but take, for example, a person's partner is receiving abuse from close family. The person then tries to convince their partner to end contact with their family. If those actually doing the abusing find out and call the police, falsely labeling the person a perpetrator of coercive control, will the law stand on the side of the citizen doing the right thing and simply looking out for their partner's best interests? The uncertainty is simply a risk our society cannot take. Domestic abuse is a massive problem in Australia. However, solutions should not be as black and white as this. The truth is that relations and family situations are incredibly complex, and one single piece of legislation is not properly equipped to handle the diverse sets of circumstances that it would impact. Smaller and more targeted pieces of legislation would be far more effective. However, there is no question that action needs to be taken on this issue. But if we rush through legislation that puts Aussies who are simply doing the right thing at risk, the state will be failing those whom we have a duty to protect, and that's just not on.
Thank you. I now call on the Honourable Member Roy Singh.
President, the Honourable Member Roy Singh speaking. The disclosure of personal information, Clause 4 of the 2021 Coercive Control Bills, mean that releasing or making the affected person information available to another person will become criminalized. Releasing this information could significantly harm a victims of domestic violence, as the impacts because of the breach of confidentiality can result in a physical, financial, emotional, or reputational harm. In the circumstances of reputational damage, the disclosure of personal information could cause further dependency of the abuser. The loss of work and career opportunity limits a victim's ability to remain financially stable and sustain their lifestyles. And therefore, decreasing the opportunity to escape the abuse relationship for the safety, the release of the victim's personal information may additionally lead to the embarrassment of humiliation, where the disclosure of the victim's sexual orientation and medical history may cause them isolate from family, friends, and or society, and possibly place the victim in harm's way due to the religious, cultural, or personal values and beliefs. A breach in the disclosure of victims' personal information may also lead to reputational damage, where as a result could cause further dependency on the abuser, loss of work, career opportunity, may remain financially stable to sustain the lifestyle. This disclosure of information and utter disrespect of the survivor ultimately focuses them to become less and less independent. The abusers use this tactic to return the manipulated survivor. Coercive control must be criminalized for safety and protection for our Victorians. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Honourable Member Goldie.
Thank you. President, Honourable Member Goldie. The intentions behind the Coercive Control Bill are justified and reasonable. However, realistically, this bill will do little to lower the current rates of domestic violence within Australia. It simply does not target the real issues surrounding coercive control and domestic violence. In many domestic violence and abusive situations, people on the outside are unaware that it is happening. This bill requires reporting violence and abuse to authorities, which is simply not realistic. 48.2% of people did not report their most recent experiences with domestic violence. A main reason for this was the fear of revenge from an offender, which can become incredibly common, as we have seen through news in the recent years. A different reason, which I believe should be addressed and targeted instead of the current targets of this bill, are the unwillingness of authorities to assist domestic violence survivors. Over 10% of people who did not report their abuse did not do so because of traumatizing past experiences with different authorities and police officers. Over 17% of people who attempted to report their abusers identified that police were not understanding of the situation or proactive in being aware of all types of domestic violence. Instead of immediately targeting coercive control, we must first target the inability of our current systems to assist people in domestic violence situations and situations of coercive control. We need to make help accessible before we begin criminalizing further behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the Honourable Member Din.
President, the Honourable Member Din, Clause 6.1 of Coercive Control refers to the restraint of one's activities such as monitoring of behaviour, appearance, visitation of and or with family, and even the basic right of seeking professional mental, medical and physical help. This already is exceedingly ill-founded, but keep in mind, these are just early warning signs. The issue lies beyond this. As a citizen of Australia, we should be able to practice our basic human rights at all times. Unfortunately, some members of our state, this is not a reality. Passing this bill will enable survivors all over the state to have access to basic services that they are being deprived of. It is not up to someone's partner to determine whether or not they are able to seek help for any situation. It is the survivor's right. The reason for people not coming forward with their abuse is because it is left until it's been physical. This bill is about encompassing all forms of abuse. Addressing some of the government's comments on Scotland, 400 cases came forward within the first 3 months of the implementation of this bill. This is indeed a complex legislation. unlike the government's description of it. If you won't listen to us, please listen to services such as the Orange Door, who are specialists and professionals in this field. Why has this had to happen? Why are we where we are today in our current society? It is crucial that the barbaric nature of this situation is to be recognised. What evidence is there to suggest that Indigenous women be disadvantaged with coercive control? The fact that they are at a higher risk of domestic violence shows exactly why we need this legislation. Denying this bill is denying the right to life. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Honourable Member Mitchell.
President, Honourable Member Mitchell speaking. While members of both sides of this debate clearly believe in the importance of reducing levels and impacts of domestic violence in Victoria, the opposition feel as if this bill is simply a band-aid solution and won't solve much at all, and in fact, it'll probably make things worse. The sponsoring team outlined wanting to prevent coercive control, but according to our investigation, this bill won't do this at all. Firstly, this bill talks about punishment after the police are brought to the attention of the situation. At this point, the damage has mostly been done. Although the perpetrator will be put away, there will still be many adverse long-term mental health outcomes for the survivor, which the opposition stressed. Also, by criminalising coercive control, you are basically begging victims to stay silent because there is so much more at stake for the perpetrator. These perpetrators, who have already got too much control over victims, will ensure their actions are performed in the dark, particularly given the implementation of this bill means that they will be severely punished if their actions are found out. Reducing rates of reporting violence isn't going to help anyone. Instead, our team believes that if this bill were to be amended to focus on the prevention of coercive control rather than the incrimination of it, it could have more impact. This could be done through the educational programs in schools and workplaces, mandatory online units that every Victorian citizen over the age of 18 must complete, introducing services that focus on problem solving and conflict management. While the sponsoring party has the right idea in trying to reduce domestic violence, if the coercive control bill is unamended, it will go entirely against what they aim to achieve by reducing the rate of reporting and, quite frankly, by not doing enough. The opposition also stated that 16% of people experience coercive control in their lifetime. With the implementation of this bill, that does not change, but with prevention, it does. It is more important to prevent than to criminalise. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the floor is now open to debate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does anyone want to speak? Or am I just not seeing? Okay, so I see a hand up. The Honourable Member Wazinski.
President, the Honourable Member Pszczynski. The government can criminalise, can educate all they want. The fact is that there will still be cases of this sort of abuse. And if it's not criminalised, then a victim cannot do anything about it because they cannot get their abuser put into a prison or put through the criminal system. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any, sorry, I don't know what the actual, sorry. Do we have a speaker from the government? I can't see any hands up, but that doesn't mean that there's none up. It just means I can't understand the technology.
Heath speaking, Ali, it does mean that there are no hands up. So I feel like if there's no more speakers, then I feel, oh, we actually have the member Butler.
Okay, all right. Yes, I call on the Honourable Member Butler.
Thank you, President. The Honourable Member Butler. So I'm going to reiterate the point that as the sponsoring team talked about how they want to prevent coercive control, as members of government have already stated, this bill is not the correct approach to solving this issue. Victims already face tremendous amount of struggle with coming forward in the first place to talk about what they have experienced, let alone bringing it to court to criminalize it. If we want to actually prevent this from happening, criminalizing it is not the option, as we need to have more support for the victims through prevention matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak, this time from the opposition? Okay, so do we have the Honourable Member Beard?
The Honourable President, the Honourable Member Beard. Prevention, while useful, does not help the people who are current victims and people who are experiencing now the abuse that this bill is trying to criminalise. Prevention helps those in the future, and that is wonderful. But criminalising it is going to help not only show people that there are consequences to these actions, but also help protect the people who are experiencing the abuse now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a speaker from the government?
Kate speaking. Ali, if we don't have any more speakers, then I feel that the time for this debate has expired. Oh, once again, we have somebody who wants to come speak.
Okay, thank you. The Honourable Member Fitzsimmons.
President, the Honourable Member Fitzsimmons speaking. I would like to point out that in the bill, the opposition has used the term affected person when describing someone who's experiencing the coercive control, but throughout their speeches, they've actually referred to the affected person as a victim. And I think perhaps the stance should be less about making people victims and more about acknowledging their experiences and not victimizing them. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? No? Oh, yes, no? Okay, the Honourable Member Duff?
The Honourable Member Duff, I apologise. I'm going to keep my camera off because I don't really have the appropriate youth parliament clothing on. But I'd like to add, and I hope that this isn't too much of a digression, but perhaps there may be some importance in using the word victim, because perhaps from the perspective of someone that has experienced abuse of sorts, maybe the word victim isn't too inappropriate, so long as it isn't denigrating the I'm sorry, I put my hand back down.
Okay, no, that's still a good point, I think. All right, so my script says right of reply next. Is that relevant or not?
Yes.
It is? Yep. So I call on the sponsor of the bill for their right of reply.
President, Honourable Member Ablett speaking. Just a quick note on the victims note. Legally, they will be referred to victims in cases, so it's really not inappropriate to refer to them this way. But to conclude, I just want to say how important this legislation is to save lives and improve women and children's lives, and men as well that also suffer from this. And that, yes, not every coercive controlling situation will lead to physical abuse, but every single physically abusive relationship does involve coercive control. So we need to look at these both together to try and prevent physical abuse. And earlier, one of the speakers stated that Australia doesn't want to legalise it because we're not ready for it. The fact is we already have states that are putting it forward, and Tasmania has already put this bill forward. So we are more than ready for this legislation. Also, we had issues with the rehabilitation part of it, not wanting to put many people in prison. We do have rehabilitation sanctions for this reason. For cases where they don't need to be imprisoned, but they need help, we have rehabilitation sanctions for that reason. Also, with the Indigenous part of it, as Honourable Member Tuan said, that this is aimed at communities that struggle with domestic violence the most, to help prevent these cases from going forward. So this is exactly what these minorities need to improve their quality of life. This is not a band-aid, this is a perfect reform. It's creating a whole new set of laws and legislation to help a group of people that have been completely overlooked, that their suffering has been completely overlooked and needs to be focused on and acknowledged so these people can live a good quality life. And finally, our bill comprehensively looks at differing circumstances to accurately determine case-by-case situations so that both the perpetrators and the victims are getting a fair say in cases. And so this is very important legislation that needs to go forward and will help a lot of people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're on to the third reading now, are we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is that the bill be read a second and a third time. All those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary, no. Okay, if we're all done, I think the ayes have it. Therefore, it is resolved. Oh, hang on. The numbers are changing. Sorry. Are we not ready? Are we ready?
I think, yeah, we're ready. Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, it is resolved in the affirmative. Okay. All right. That's the end of my script.
That's it.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much. Congratulations, Mildura. Ali, do you want to say